DLC Fort Worth was almost completely doomed, but luckily enough, 1,897 players were able to get together and still make the tournament without Microsoft or whatever the hell happened with Microsoft crashing and burning the tournament. Thankfully, we were still able to play, participate, really kind of without an issue, thankfully. I know some of you didn't make it, and I'm really upset for you. I can't imagine what it would have been like if I was ready to go to the tournament on Friday morning to find out I couldn't. Luckily, I got there Thursday morning, and I woke up Friday morning, and it was bad. Felt so bad for so many different players, but it happened. We played. 1,800 plus players were there. Let's break down that tournament, kind of look at the top decks from day 2, and talk about a little things coming in the future. Let's get into it. The DLC Fort Worth breakdown. Here are the top 64 decks. As you can see, we had 30 Emerald Steel, 10 Sapphire Steel, 8 Ruby Amethyst, 7 Amber Steel, 5 Ruby Sapphire, 2 Amber Emerald, 1 Amber Ruby, and 1 Amber Amethyst. This isn't really that big of a difference from the previous few weeks, but there was far less Ruby Amethyst in contention here in the top cut of decks. There was a incredible amount of Emerald Steel in the tournament. I never saw an exact number for how many were registered in the full breakdown like we had in Botcham. Unfortunately, maybe one day we'll get those numbers. It's hard to tell. But all in all, you can see here that, 44%, 45% of the field was Emerald Steel, the same. So you can see metagame developing, less Ruby Amethyst were successful this particular weekend, but did get the overall win, which is, nice to see. Amber Steel was a deck that was really down in Botcham. I mean, Amber decks in general were down in Botcham, which we're going to touch on a little bit, but that was able to come out and see 7 in the top finals. Ruby Sapphire way down with only 5, and then a couple trickling other Amber splashes to finish off the top 64. So 8 decks in the top 64 is nice versatility. It's really nice showcasing that was able to be achieved in a Bucky format. And I do wonder moving forward, now that Bucky is going to be errata in the next large DLC, sadly, it is not for the next European DLC. So we are still going to get one more tournament with Bucky there. But, this is a lot of good information for them to look at. A lot of, seeing that, hey, while 30 of them were in, day 2, there's also a world here that's showcasing that plenty of these other decks were able to get in and showcase that we have a chance to be successful in this metagame. Therefore, lots to look at, lots of information to be used, and we'll see kind of how that plays out in the very final week with these cards with Bucky in a non-errata format. We'll have to see how it goes. Ruby Amethyst takes down its second event in a row, this time played by none other than Ed. Ed is a good friend of Team TFM. Him and George actually worked together toward the deck list in Atlanta. And since then, him and George have been great friends. It was nice to see a friendly face win a Disney Lorcana challenge. I was able to sit there and see Ed win his top 16, his top 8, and his top 4 match. It was really nice to see the excitement that he had playing Disney Lorcana and really feeling so very good about his choices in the deck that he played. And obviously picking up the first place victory in DLC Fort Worth is an incredible achievement in an 1,800 plus player tournament. As far as the list go, there are 2 crucial changes from previous lists in the past. A few weeks ago, we interviewed Luca on the channel, and he discussed why he was only playing 4 Chernobog's followers. In this list, we do see 4 Magic Brooms also at the 1-cost slot. And another key factor here is the addition of 2 Floodborn Sisus, which effectively gives Ed a 4 Be Prepared 2 Sisu line, which against the majority of the metagame is effectively like playing a Be Prepared with 3 lore that stays in play. I think Sisu is a great addition to this particular deck. I think it really worked wonders for Ed, but the other true difference in this particular list is only playing 2 Medusa, 2 Sisu, 4 Be Prepared, and 4 Merlin Rabbits. That's only 12 uninkables. So against a lot of the mirror matches where they are fighting for their ink counts, this deck was really low to the ground. It was really safe, and probably by being safe, added a ton of consistency to the list, which very likely gave the edge in mirror matches. But also, having Sisu in the mirror match is just another card that's not particularly easy to deal with. Having to utilize foxes and really be able to even get away with utilizing foxes late in the game after your opponent's already gained 3 lore with a Sisu is pretty great. And when in doubt, Sisu can sing Be Prepared as well in the mirror to kind of regain tempo as well. All in all, I think Ed played incredibly well this weekend. And if you're really wondering a little bit more about this list in depth, I'm going to be interviewing Ed on the channel. And if you really, listen, you got any questions for him, hit me up in the comments and let me know so I can ask him. If there's a really particular good one, I'll be sure to use it. Can't wait to talk to Ed, break down the tournament, break down his thoughts with Ruby Amethyst moving forward into a Bucky-less metagame. Chris Croy finished in second place at DLC Fort Worth, playing Amber Steel. Amber Steel ended up being a little bit more than I think anyone really believed it was going to be going into the tournament. For me, as an example, I played against 3 Amber Steels in this tournament. That's just me, one player. 7 Amber Steels finished in day 2 in the top 64, 2 of which made it all the way to the top 4. So Amber Steel was definitely a deck to be reckoned with. There were many iterations of the deck: Flute, Pride Lands, Underworld, Harp, so many different variations of Amber Steel seeing success and being playable, which really is a good sign of the future, showing that this list can likely compete in a future metagame without Bucky as well, and has a lot of versatility and choice involved. Chris particularly chose here to bring the pack of 3 World's Greatest Criminal Mind, 3 Let the Storm Rage On, 4 Along Came Zeus, 4 A Whole New World, and 3 Grab Your Swords. The other little kink here is 4 Baloo and 4 Lawrence. Characters that we don't see too much of in any list, but Baloo making an impact, basically being a way to protect your singers or protect your shift characters in a pretty cheap manner, along with getting 2 lore when banished. Lawrence is a 4/4 that when he hits play, he can't be brawled. There's not a whole lot of just straight removal for a 4/4 character, and they have to, in theory, waste 2 removals likely on him or just cheap shot him later on. But if they're able to cheap shot and take the strength away, then you get to have really big times and big fun with Rapunzel as well. So there's a lot of synergy within the Amber Steel meta there. However, it is a card that's been around for a little while, and while it saw some success this weekend, it's hard to be sure if it will maintain success. It might have just been a really nice one-off time to play the card and really take advantage of certain metagames. It's really hard to tell if that card will stay within the Amber Steel package. Emerald Steel had 30 players in the top 64. Lots and lots of success for Emerald Steel in the weekend, and the quote Bucky farewell tour here. We do have a few more weeks of him, of course, but hey, here it is. Here's what we're looking at. This was the most successful Emerald Steel deck in day 2, played by Kevin here. What I really like about this particular list is that it has so many Floodborn characters. It is truly committed to the Bucky bit. 27 Floodborn characters. Only 5 one-cost characters with 4 Hidden Coves. That is a true commitment to the Hidden Cove gameplay. It's really telling everyone, hey, Hidden Cove is not just a tech card anymore. Hidden Cove is actually a fundamental to my core gameplay. That's what Kevin thought here, and clearly it worked out well for him. He had an incredible run in the DLC day 2, and having 4 Cove is just a true testament to understanding the mirror match, understanding ways to beat Ruby Amethyst, understanding ways to beat Amber Steel and even Sapphire Steel, keeping your characters protected against Brawl, against Grab Your Swords, against Let the Storm Rage On, and things like that goes a long way if you have 4 Hidden Cove. It's definitely a nice choice that was made. It's an interesting one all about, but hey, to say I don't need 4 Robins, is definitely a nice little testament. The one thing that I'm really curious about this deck moving forward and how it continues to evolve, if a card like Morph could be more successful in a deck like this. Maybe we don't need the 1 Robin maybe we can cut down on one of something else and just fit a couple, like 2 or 3 morphs in here to just keep your opponents on their heels. You never know when shift into something is going to be good, specifically late in the game. Shout out to Team TFM member Kyle McGinty, finishing in the top 32 with Sapphire Steel this past weekend. For Team TFM, we were split into 2 decks. We had Amber Steel and Sapphire Steel as our decks of choice. Our Sapphire Steel decks were all kind of debatable. 2 or 3 of the members played this version. 1 to 2 played a slightly other version, and then another one played a more aggressive version. So there was a lot of kind of undecided barriers of what Sapphire Steel looked like for Team TFM going into the tournament, because each player had their different playstyle and lines that they were considering to be the best for them. This was the list that was most successful of all of the team for Sapphire Steel. Kyle played incredibly well, finishing in day 2 and then picking up a top 64 win to finish in the top 32. Kyle inevitably lost to Emerald Steel in the top 32. In game 1, Emerald Steel just had the best hand it possibly could and was able to pick Kyle apart. And in game 2, Kyle said he just had a really rough opening hand after mulligan and could not recover against the deck. Sometimes that's what happens in these tournaments. It's what happens in Sapphire Steel matches. That, unfortunately, every once in a while, you get maybe a little greedy in your mulligan and you end up losing because of it. Sapphire Steel was the second most successful deck in the tournament with 10 in the top 64. A lot of the lists look really close and really similar to this version of the deck. Having Chenpo, having Argus, having some number of Lucky Dimes, some number of Babooms. There really is not much particular tech in this version of the deck anymore. There are choices. You can play more Captain Hooks. You don't have to play Argus necessarily. You can play Fire the Cannons. You can play 4 Babooms, 4 Grab Your Swords. Like, there are these numbers that kind of fluctuate and go up and down. And, of course, all around. I think that this is a list that through the entirety of the Ursula's Return metagame thus far has really molded and adapted as often as possible to kind of keep up with some of the other rising decks within Disney Lorcana's metagame. Huge shout out again to Kyle, finishing in the top 32, just missing that Nationals invite. I wanted to take kind of a second here to discuss the breakdown just a little bit further. What's really interesting here is that in Bockham, Amber decks had a less than 1% chance of making a day 2 in Bockham, which is kind of crazy when you really consider that 2,000 players in those tournaments, 1,000 tournament, cut to 32, and we only had 2 Amber decks in total success make day 2s. In this event, we have 11, which is really crazy to say, but if you look at this list, there's only 9 Amethyst decks, which means Ruby Amethyst really carried the Amethyst and Ruby Ink for those combinations, where Amber now all of a sudden found its way into 4 different decks into the day 2 of a DLC. So Amber is showing like, hey, listen, I'm not out here. I'm not dead in the water. I do have opportunity. I do have some playability and some versatility. So all those things that are going on is just kind of proving a little bit more that as a metagame evolves, as decks really start figuring out what they need to do to be able to win, there's always a chance that you have kind of to mold a given deck in a given metagame. Sometimes it just takes a little more time to figure out what that is and really what you need to be successful. So right now, Ruby Amethyst was sky high the last couple events. This one is, faded. We're down to 8. That's below. It was 3rd best, where it was, sitting kind of really nicely at 2nd best for a couple events now. That's not true for this one. In Fort Worth, we played a little differently, had a little less success. I don't know if that's because more of it had more of a target on its back, maybe. Maybe there was more Amber Steel targeting it and things like that. Maybe there was more Sapphire Steel decks that were specifically targeting Ruby Amethyst as well. So if more decks are molding and adapting to Ruby Amethyst, then it's possible that it falls down a little bit. It's also possible that more mirror matches happened, and that could kind of affect the numbers as well a little bit. So all in all, I thought it was cool to see Amber really take a kick back and say, hey, I'm coming after this tournament, and I'm going to give it my best effort. And having Amber Steel in the top finals and as well the top 4, there was actually a mirror match in top 4, really showcasing that Amber Steel is back, and Amber in general as an ink has the potential to move forward in a metagame without Bucky as well. Speaking of Amber decks, let's check out Emerald Amber, played by Jordan here. This is a deck that, again, has been really successful in limited spurts, played in limited numbers. But as the metagame has evolved, and honestly, as the potential of Bucky fading away, this is a deck that really can be successful into a lot of the better decks in the metagame. Having a really good matchup in a Sapphire Steel, having a really good matchup into Ruby Sapphire as well, figuring out ways to beat Ruby Amethyst with You Have Forgotten Me and Cricky. But I will say that it could kind of fall fate to Amber Steel. Might just be a little bit faster than it. Have the ability to like remove your setup a little easier to make it more difficult for you. But hey, sometimes all it really takes is winning the die roll in a given matchup and being able to set up before your opponent, kind of removing their songs quickly through Diablo, through the bare necessities, forcing their hand down even further with cards like Ursula and Sudden Chill. So you can take Amber Steel out of it potentially. You can definitely really punish Ruby Amethyst players that don't understand how to play the matchup as well. Or You Have Forgotten Me is a truly punishing against some of the Sapphire decks that are committed to Quill and committed to needing to play a whole new world and things like that. I really do think this particular rogue deck has a chance that in the next couple weeks at the next DLC, in Gen Con, at your next week of set champs, this might be a deck that really comes out and is successful because a lot of players just have no idea how this deck functions or how to play against it. It's not talked about much. So if you're looking for something fun to do in the last week of your set champs, I totally recommend this deck. It's so much fun to play. It really has a lot of fun interactions. And, I think the deck could be a bit under the radar still. And because of that, you can certainly pick it up, play it in set champs this weekend, play it at Gen Con in the smaller 64-man tournaments. Hey, maybe you're even going to SCG Baltimore this weekend and you're looking for something different. I do believe that, as Bucky starts to fade, or if you're predicting more other decks in the final weeks of this Bucky era, then, Amber Emerald might be a really fun choice to just give a chance. Ruby Sapphire finished in the top 16, played by Pham Din Kang at the Disney Lorcana Challenge in Fort Worth. I want to give a huge shout out to Pham. He was my only O2 in the tournament. And man, was Vital Spear the vital reason that is happening. He was able to Vital Spear me not once, but twice. The Queen of Hearts also came up very relevant in my strategy of how I wanted to play against Ruby Sapphire. But Pham was not having anything of it. Another huge shout out to him. Came all the way from Germany, flew 18 hours to play in the DLC, finished in the top 16, and it was only his 4th tournament. The dig a little deeper is, I think, the most intriguing card here. And honestly, after watching him play it against me, after seeing it in some of the other highlighted matches, I personally am not very interested in the card. I don't think it's good enough in a world where we're exerting just Tamatoa or even Maleficent to play it. I think it's a little bit too costly. And if I were moving forward with this list, I do believe I would get rid of it. I just don't think it fits well enough. I don't think it does enough to secure a spot for me. So if you're looking to just kind of fill out this list just a little bit, I do not think we have to dig a little deeper. I think we can remove that card and just play just about any other card, if I'm being honest, that fits in this package, and just not rely on having that card. I don't even really want to Fishbone Quill that card on average. Aside from that, we can see the Hercules here. We can see a Judy. Just a little bit of everything out of this list that does draw a ton of cards. Having Vital Spear, having Queen really does punish opponents that were leaning more on the locations to grind out the final points of victory against Ruby Sapphire. It does give you a little more leverage into Queen's Castle as well. 4 1-jumps, 4 how far I go is really exactly where I want to be in Ruby Sapphire. That's all I ever want to do. I want to spend the first 4 turns of the game, well, really just the first 3 turns of the game, of ramping and drawing cards, and then allowing my opponent to get to 6, 8, 10 lore. It doesn't really matter. Once you get to 7 ink, you just have the ability to turn off the game for your opponent in so many different ways. So that is really just understanding what the point of this deck is, getting out ahead, and really utilizing your character as best as possible. Even a Queen of Hearts coming in and doing 2 damage to one of the 1/2s or the O1s in the future, and then just being able to sing 1 jump ahead is even more crucial sometimes. But the fact that she's also inkable in your bad matchups where you don't need her, if you can get to punish opponents for exerting Buckies or exerting Flynn Riders, it's just a huge bonus to have that card in your deck. Really does represent a nice little role within anything that you're trying to do for all of your matchups. All in all, Ruby Sapphire fell off this week with only 5 being successful. But, shout out to Fam here, picking up a top 16 finish and really playing incredibly well all weekend. Amber Ruby Mufasa, this player, Nick Davis, was the only Mufasa player to find his home in the top 64. Definitely sporting a few interesting choices here. Mickey Mouse, Brave Little Towler, makes a return to deck building. It's been so very long since I've seen the gigantic, evasive 4-lore character, along with a brand new card that I have yet to see in a deck, which was Nexus. Nexus is a 6-cost, inkable, 7 strength, 5 willpower, and 2 lore character. He is quite beefy. He does one-shot Castle, which is notable. And with Gaston, you can play this character on turn 4 and really start just beating people down with your 7 strength, 5 willpower character. Great target for Rapunzel as well. And what I really think needs to be said about these decks is that while they're called Amber, Ruby, Mufasa, I really think they just need to be transitioned into Amber, Ruby, Rapunzel. Anytime a player is able to draw 3 cards with Rapunzel in this deck, likely gives them more wins than if they can flip a Maleficent on their Mufasa, and it's probably easier to guarantee that, in all honesty. I think this is a deck that does get a bit more beefy with the lack of Bucky in the metagame. It's one of its hardest matchups by far is because they're just able to pick apart your hand and kind of take away your setup characters too easily. But with Bucky being removed, this is a deck that I would definitely be on the lookout for moving forward. Amber Amethyst was another top 64 deck this past weekend played by Trey. This deck is pedal to the metal aggression. 21 drop characters is pretty insane, followed by 14 2-drop characters, the suite of Baloo and Donald Duck as your bodyguards, Arthur as a way to pick up characters, Fox as a way to pick up characters, Pongo as a way to refill, and of course, Goat as the way to finish out games along with Queen's Castle. This deck is absolutely hoping and praying to see the Ruby Amethyst matchup and the Ruby Sapphire matchups, dodging as many grab your swords as possible, or to be able to keep your characters unexerted with characters like Snake, Fox, and Arthur, utilizing the Baloo and Donald Duck to the best of your ability to protect your cheap 2-lore characters as well. This deck is certainly looking to catch people off guard, gain as much lore as quickly as possible, and finish the game with Goat, Baloo, and Queen's Castle. That was it. That was our 8 best decks and most successful decks from the top 64. Those were the highest placing seeded decks for each of the represented 8 decks in that event. But my question to you now moving forward is, hey, Bucky is getting an errata. So coming up very shortly here, we're not going to have Bucky. We are going to have some set 5 Shimmering Skies before we know it. But one last tournament in North America will take place in Toronto at the Disney Lorcana Challenge on August 22nd or 23rd, something like that, 24th. I can't remember exactly. But I guess what I'm curious about it, guys, is listen, here we are. We got most of the Shimmering Skies spoiled. We have a Bucky-less format coming up for Toronto. What decks are we looking at? What do we think is best? Personally, I think Amber Steel still very well positioned. I think Ruby Amethyst is very well positioned. I think we might see the return of Amethyst Emerald potentially as well. Some of the other Amber decks really, kind of coming back as, kind of there too. So I think there's a lot going on. I think it's really cool. What's this? Oh, what a hat, guys. That's pretty cool. Shout out to the team for the hat. But yes, here we are, mere weeks away, last week of Set Champs. I think any of the decks that I put on there today is a perfect deck to bring to set jams. I do think some are a little more difficult to play than others, but if you're just looking to like get in there for one last week, try something different, then no better week to do it in these coming weeks here. You're going to Gen Con, same concept, same scenario. It's next weekend, which is crazy. Basically the 1-year celebration of the release of Disney Lorcana at Gen Con. You're going to have 1-year pins and things like that of Brave Little Tailor, which is pretty cool to see him in a Mufasa deck around the celebration of the 1-year release. Lots of cool things to break down. Let me know in the comments how you enjoyed this metagame. Of course, what deck you're expecting to be successful in the next. If you haven't yet, hit the like button for me. If you're new here, you like videos like this, I do these almost weekly. Hit subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next video.